Picture the wealthiest person in your suburb. Got an image in your head? A flashy European car in the driveway? A designer logo on the handbag? Maybe a renovated mansion with a pool out back? Here's the problem. That image is almost certainly wrong. Because across Australia, the data tells a completely different story. The people sitting on the biggest piles of wealth are often driving a 10-year-old Corolla, living in a modest, paid-off home in a suburb nobody's heard of, and wearing the same jacket they bought 5 years ago. Meanwhile, some of the flashiest-looking households in the country are drowning in debt just to keep up appearances. So why does the look of wealth and the reality of wealth diverge so dramatically? And what does that gap actually teach Australians who are trying to build real financial security? Stick around, because by the end of this video, the way you judge rich is going to change for good. Let's start with the trap, the visibility trap. There's a concept finance commentators call stealth wealth, and it sits at the exact opposite end of the spectrum from flaunted wealth. Flaunted wealth is the watch, the car, the holiday photos. Stealth wealth is invisible by design. It's sitting quietly in superannuation accounts, in paid-down mortgages, in share portfolios nobody talks about at dinner parties. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Visible spending and actual net worth are frequently inversely related. The household leasing a luxury SUV might be one missed paycheck away from financial stress. The household in the unremarkable brick veneer home 2 streets over might have a net worth in the millions. Psychologists call the spending side of this conspicuous consumption, buying things specifically to signal status rather than to build long-term assets. It's spending engineered to be seen, not spending engineered to compound. Now let's look at what the actual numbers show. According to Australian Bureau of Statistics data, average household net worth in Australia reached $1.584 million in 2024, up from $858,000 just a decade earlier in 2014. That's a staggering rate of accumulation, and almost none of it happened through visible spending. But averages can be misleading, because a small number of extremely wealthy households drag that number upward. The Grattan Institute's modeling gives a clearer, more typical picture using median figures instead. For households aged between 25 and 40, the median net worth sits around $238,000. For households between 41 and 64, that figure leaps to around $809,000. And for households over 65, it's roughly $817,000. Notice something? None of that wealth was built by leasing a luxury car. It was built quietly, year after year, mostly through 2 unglamorous channels: property and superannuation. Property remains the single dominant asset class in Australian household wealth, and it isn't visible day to day. Nobody walking past a modest home knows whether it's fully paid off or mortgaged to the hilt. Superannuation is even less visible. It's a number on a statement that most Australians barely look at, quietly compounding in the background for decades. Together, these 2 unglamorous, unphotographable assets are doing almost all of the heavy lifting in Australian wealth creation. And here's where the disconnect really bites. Income and net worth are not the same thing. A high-income earner with an expensive lifestyle, big repayments, and aggressive lifestyle inflation can have a surprisingly modest net worth. Meanwhile, a household on a moderate income that has spent decades paying down a mortgage and contributing steadily to superannuation can end up with a far larger net worth than households earning double their salary. High earners are not always wealthy, and wealthy households are not always high-income earners. So what does the average-looking millionaire actually look like? Picture a household where the car is older, comfortable, paid for outright, not leased, not financed. The home is modest, possibly in an unremarkable suburb, but it's been owned for 15 or 20 years, meaning most or all of the mortgage has already been paid off. Visible spending is low, holidays are modest, clothing isn't flashy, but quietly, Decade after decade, two things have been doing the real work: time in the market and compounding. Consider a composite, illustrative household, not a real person, just a pattern that shows up again and again in the data. A dual-income couple in their late 50s living in the same modest home they bought in their 30s. Mortgage paid off years ago. Superannuation balances built steadily through compulsory employer contributions plus voluntary top-ups. A modest share portfolio, untouched, reinvesting dividends instead of spending them. From the street, this household looks completely unremarkable. On a balance sheet, it tells a very different story. Now here's the part that should genuinely concern anyone chasing the look of wealth. Looking rich actively works against building real wealth. Lifestyle inflation is the silent killer of net worth. As income rises, spending tends to rise right alongside it, eating up exactly the surplus that should have gone into savings or investments. The result? Higher income, but barely any extra wealth accumulation. Worse, much of Australia's visible affluence is debt-funded. Leased cars, credit-funded renovations, buy now, pay later luxury purchases. The gap between how a household appears and what its actual balance sheet says can be enormous. And that gap is often filled entirely with liabilities, not assets. And then there's the social pressure, the uniquely Australian keeping up dynamic, where neighborhoods, school gates, and social circles quietly compete on appearances. It's an expensive game, and the prize for winning it is often a thinner balance sheet, not a thicker one. This brings us to something researchers call the suburb effect. Outward markers, suburb, car, clothing, turn out to be remarkably unreliable indicators of actual wealth. There are quiet pockets of high net worth where homes have been owned outright for decades, hiding in plain sight behind unremarkable street frontages. And there are visibly affluent-looking areas carrying enormous mortgage debt, propped up by leverage rather than equity. The suburb tells you almost nothing about who's actually wealthy. So what's the mindset shift that needs to happen? It's reframing the entire goal from looking wealthy to actually being wealthy. That means prioritizing asset accumulation, property equity, superannuation contributions, shares, over visible status spending that disappears the moment it's purchased. The wealthiest Australians aren't invisible by accident. It's simply the byproduct of where their money actually goes, into assets that compound quietly instead of purchases that depreciate loudly. So here's the challenge. Audit your own spending against this pattern. Are dollars flowing into things that compound or into things that are simply seen? Set goals based on net worth, not on appearance, because in the end, nobody's car, watch, or holiday photos will ever show up on a balance sheet, but decades of quiet, boring, consistent asset building absolutely will. If this changed the way you think about wealth in Australia, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into how money really works, not how it looks.